Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fuel Radio. On the line with me today is Ashutosh Priyadarshy. How did I do with that?
That's great. Sounds like I'm talking to my mother. Great job.
Well, I kind of doubt that, but I'm going to read a little bit about the program and the software that Ashutosh has developed. It's called Sunsama, and I mostly have been focusing on wellness, but I think our conversation today is going to fit into that for Fuel Radio, and you'll see why in a minute here. But Sunsama is an invite-only daily task manager for the top 5% of knowledge workers. Sunsama gives busy professionals struggling with stress and burnout a way to prioritize all their tasks, meetings, and to-dos one day at a time. The founders have spent the past 5 years researching this methodology. They recently launched this version of the product, and it is now used by over 100 YC founders and tech executives. So yeah, just before we go any further, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to speak.
I'm not sure how I came across the product, but I immediately liked it for a number of different reasons. Like I've been trying to use Google Tasks, and I used Asana, and I use the reminders on my phone, and they all kind of miss a piece here or there. Like with reminders on your phone, it's hard to move your tasks up and prioritize them. So I found I was always taking out a notebook and um, doing like a playoff. But Sunsama allows me to organize my tasks, one at a time. And then Google Tasks is kind of, it's just over there on the sidebar, and it's okay, and it works with your calendar and stuff like that, but it's still missing some of the functionality that you have. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I don't, and those other things are free, and it's like, how do I want to pay for something? But I liked it so much that I thought this is actually worth paying for. So I really appreciate what you've put together, and I'll talk maybe a little bit more about some of the other things that I've put together. On LinkedIn, you don't have much of a there's not much about you in your about section other than I build Sunsama. That's all you said there. So maybe you could just fill us in a little bit on your own background.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you kind of hit the biggest point there, which is I spend most of my time building Sunsama along with the rest of my team. There's 5 of us total. But my background is I studied engineering in school. After that, I was working at an early stage startup in Palo Alto, working on wearable tech.
Mhm.
But I've always sort of been interested in basically building technologies that we use every day that sort of makes us a better version of ourselves. And I think, wearable tech was sort of one version of that. Sort of, how can I be a better version of myself? How can I make sure I'm walking more? How can I make sure my posture is good? Those are kind of the problems we're solving here. And
Mhm.
sort of similarly with Sunsama, the question that sort of animates it all is like, how do I make sure that I'm sort of my best version of myself while I'm working? And how do I work well when I know that that's going to be such an important part of each day, and really part of such an important and big part of my life. So
Mhm. Yeah, I can tell. Like, I mentioned this in our pre-interview conversation. I just really enjoyed the emails that you sent out. So once I signed up, I think even for the free version, you sent out a series of 10 emails, and I could tell that your perspective on work was different than sort of the typical productivity model, like how do we get more done in less time kind of thing. So maybe you could just speak to that a little bit more. Like, why don't you like the term productivity, and maybe even, well, we'll get to it in a minute, but let's start there. Just tell
sure.
us a little bit more about your philosophy of work.
Yeah, well, I think uh, a philosophy of anything really starts with sort of like, what is the question that you're trying to answer? And I
Mm.
think fundamentally the question that I was trying to answer and that my co-founder was trying to answer when we started this was like, how do you live well? Which is sort of a question that is pushes forward a lot of like humans, and everybody's asking this question. But when you kind of realize like, okay, I want to live well. What does that mean? And you realize that, working is really it's just such an enormous component of living and being a
Mm-hmm.
person. And so our sort of bigger perspective is like, how can we live well knowing that work is such an integral part of that? And I think the particular question that we were interested in is, if we're going to spend most of our days working, how can we make sure that we're kind of doing that in a way that's thoughtful and intentional and deliberate? Um, and that's kind of why we built this product. Just, you know, feeling like it would be crazy if I had to spend sort of the next 40 years of my career sitting behind a computer using Google Calendar to sort of be thoughtful and intentional with my time, sort of felt like a unacceptable way to live.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe just tell us a little bit about the story too. Like, how did you mentioned the other tech company that you were working for, but how has Sunsama kind of come together? Who
Yeah,
was it? Was it your idea originally, or did you get together with a few other people, or how did it all start?
it came together very slowly, I would say. We
Yeah.
have sort of an odd story, but basically, my co-founder Travis and I, we got together and we were like, hey, uh, we really don't want to spend, we were just like a couple years out of school when we started, and we're like, we really do not want to spend the next 40 years using Google Calendar to figure out what we're going to do each day.
Yeah.
And actually, what happened was we spent about the first 5 years of the sort of company's life building and launching and then sunsetting six different products in the productivity, collaboration, calendaring space.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really interesting is that along the way with each of these products we launched that were sort of adjacent to Sunsama as you know it today, we got to talk to the early customers of those products. We got to, meet them at their offices, sit in on their meetings, shadow them at work, look at their calendars, talk to them about how they work. And we kind of developed this deeper intuition about how people in different job roles and different types of companies and different geographies and different sort of businesses think about this question of like, what am I working on and what am I going to do today? And just sort of over time, we built up this intuition. And when we built Sunsama as you know it today, it was really guided by this question of, can we build a better way for people to answer the question, what am I going to do today? Because that was one of the sort of commonalities we found across people, regardless of, whether they were a product manager or an engineer or a CEO. It sort of didn't matter. This is like when you roll over in bed in the morning and you kind of open your eyes and unfortunately reach for your phone. But one of the things that's going through your head is like, okay, what am I going to do today?
Mm-hmm.
And answering that question turns out to be really hard, either because the things you could do are sort of scattered across sort of a vast variety of tools, and that those tools are sort of ever growing as we kind of depend more and more on specialized SaaS applications. And then just, we just kind of have this tendency to say like, I want to do all of these things. But the reality is, you have 6 to 8 sort of good hours of where your mind is sharp to actually kind of execute on those things, and kind of picking off a reasonable set of things to do each day was something we wanted to do a better job of. So, that's kind of the backstory. And it took us a long time, a lot of building and failing and iterating before we kind of got Sunsama as you know it out the door, which sort of resonated with people.
Mm-hmm. And that's cool. I can see that. Now that you mentioned that, I'm not using this very well, but I mean, the one thing I am using is prioritizing my tasks. So I put the thing I want to get done, I put it right at the very top. And this is kind of a side note. It's funny that you mentioned we only have 6 or 8 hours of good, you know, where we can work intensely per day. I changed the way I changed my day a couple months ago, and I started work. Now I get up at 6 and I start at 7. I start work at 7 and I finish at 3 o'clock, because I was just finding by 3 o'clock I was like, I can't do anything
Yeah.
more. So that's just a side note. But then, so back to Sunsama, is you can prioritize, but then you can estimate the amount of time that you think something might take. I should probably use that more, because otherwise you can kind of get unrealistic, can't you, about exactly what, how much you're going to accomplish in a day.
Yeah, and that's one of the sort of counterintuitive things is I think people they believe that if they have this sort of long, ambitious list of things that they want to do today, that they're going to be extremely sort of productive.
Yeah.
But the reality is when you start with sort of a short, condensed list of things that you deem to be important that you also know can actually be accomplished, you sort
Hmm.
of move through the day with a lot more kind of efficiency because when your list is longer than can ever actually be done, you tend to be more passive because you just know in the back of your head it can't all get done. And
Yeah.
so it's really about finding this balance between having sort of your list for the day be something that's ambitious but actually practical to accomplish.
Hmm.
And when you can find that balance, you sort of you just naturally find that you stay focused and you're like, okay, like I I don't want to go on Twitter because these 10 minutes are actually sort of an important part of my day. And I
Hmm.
don't want to just kind of whittle them away on Twitter
Yeah.
or whatever, sort of distractions are of your that you fancy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you learn as you go along too. Like um, it helps. Like I have a number of different projects that I'm working on as an independent business owner and marketer, and it's helping me to think about estimate a little bit more. It's like, okay, I need to write a blog post for this client, and maybe when I started out with Sunsama, I'd say, oh, it's only going to take me 30 minutes or something, but realistically it takes an hour and a half or 2 hours, right? So I'm learning as I go along. It's to be more realistic, and it's just reminding me how long things take, and that can affect my billing and all that kind of stuff, to realize.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
of course it affects your billing, but I think when you embrace the reality of certain types of work take a lot longer than you kind of expected, it also kind
Hmm.
of frees you up to say like, hey, if I just get like this blog post done today, turns out that was actually a really sort of effective and productive day,
Sure.
um, rather than trying to dream up doing 100 things that could never have actually been done anyway. So it kind of
Yeah.
frees you up.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so maybe just say, maybe talk a little bit about the features of Sunsama. I'll mention some of the things that I like, and you can go from there.
Sure.
I'm not using Slack a lot, but I have worked on some projects where I have worked on Slack, and I could see if I only had one project and one client that, or one job, that Slack would work really well. I'm not really using that integration right now, but I like the possibility of using it. I like that my email shows up as one of the steps, and I can drag those in as tasks. That's really cool. I'm tending to keep Asana and Sunsama separately, to tell you the truth, because yeah, it gets too confusing for me to use multiple sort of task lists or project lists or whatever. Um, yeah, and then I just did a big, sorry, I just did a big webinar on Saturday, and I was like chief cook and bottle washer. I was the MC, and I was doing the advertising. And so I liked that I could, I had one category or one to-do list, and I had all the tasks underneath that. And then I
Sure.
would just drag it to the next day. But then I could see what I had completed as well. Those didn't disappear. I just ticked them off. So I really, really like that as well. What are some of the what are some of the features that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. Yeah. So the kind of big idea with Sunsama and sort of what makes it different from something like Asana, for example, which people are pretty familiar with, or Trello, is basically that Sunsama is a daily planner and daily to-do list. So what you're doing in Sunsama is when you log in each morning, you'll actually be prompted with a flow that will walk you through the process of planning out your workday. So kind
Mhm.
of picking off the tasks that you want to do. And one of the things we do is we let you integrate with other services. So whether it's Asana or Trello or Jira or GitHub or Gmail, whatever, we basically let you pull in tasks from those services. So you may have an Asana project or something in any other tool where you're kind of planning out work on kind of these longer time scales. Like, this is what we want to do for this client or this project or this quarter or this sprint. And what you're really doing in Sunsama is saying like, okay, great. Like as an organization or as a kind of, we've planned out these bigger picture items. Here's like the 1 or 2 tasks from that thing that I'm actually going to kind of work on today. And so once you've kind of planned your day in Sunsama, you don't need to like sort of throw yourself into this kind of crazy place, which is all of the tasks that you need to do over the next month. But you're really just looking at, hey, these are like the 2 Trello tasks or 2 Asana tasks that I need to do alongside with a couple of meetings. And you can also pull in an email and say like, hey, this email is going to require me like 20 minutes of actually reading and responding to. So basically, we let you kind of plan out your day by stitching together work that you have in a lot of different tools.
Cool. So if I drag something from Gmail, for example, or I drag something from Trello into Sunsama, it's not going to delete it or pull it out of Trello. It's just putting it into
Yeah,
Sunsama. Yeah.
exactly. So you're kind of saying
Okay.
like, this is part of my plan in Sunsama today.
Hmm.
And each integration works a little differently. But for example, if you check off a task in Sunsama that is sort of linked to a Gmail task, you can have that sort of automatically mark that email as read or archive it or label it, whatever your particular workflow is. The idea is that, you use Sunsama to plan out your day, and then you shouldn't have to like kind of live in those other apps throughout the day so that you can just kind of focus on the task at hand.
Yeah. Excellent. No, it's a great tool. So you know what? I'll give Asana a try. We'll see. I'll add it and
Yeah.
see how it works.
And the best way to do that is just like continue to use Asana to plan out longer term projects and just pull in like the 1 or 2 things you actually want to get done. And that's
Right.
like what's really happening is it's like your chance to be intentional about these are the things I actually want to do today.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times when you just open up this big Kanban board and look at it, you're like, oh my goodness, there's so much to do. And it sort of creates a
Exactly.
sense of just being totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. And I know my personality style is when I get overwhelmed, I shut down, So I think that's a great idea is just to look at Asana, see the 1 or 2 things that I need to get done today and drag them in. That's a great idea. Um, well, cool. Yeah, I just want to encourage people to check it out. And like I say, it's been a great. I've really enjoyed using it. I'm wondering, just before we wrap up, if maybe you want to talk a little bit more about working well. If you have any tips for us, maybe pull from some of the things that you sent out in your email. In your email, you talked about everything from burnout to being productive. So and like I say, those emails were fantastic. And just wondering if you have some tips for our listeners today on working well.
Sure. One of the things I've been thinking more about recently is sort of how do you avoid distractions, sort of digital distractions in
Hmm.
particular. And the idea I keep coming back to is that instead of sort of focusing on avoiding it and kind of telling yourself, no, I shouldn't check Twitter, no, I shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, whatever those things are for you, it's actually a lot easier to avoid distraction by actually kind of moving your focus towards something else and something more important. And kind of for me, what I found is that if I can be extremely intentional about like what I want to do today or during this next hour, I naturally feel like, okay, now that I've decided that that's important, I'm just like less likely to want to check Twitter. And it's like if you can find a way to really believe that what you're doing right now is important, you sort of naturally don't check Twitter, and then you don't really feel this like sense of guilt. And so and that's one of the things we've tried to work into the product. Basically, it's like if you can be really deliberate and intentional about what you think is important, all of that stuff that's not important and that's distracting, it just kind of falls away to the side and you're just like less interested in it. So uh, I've been reading a lot about how do you avoid distractions, turn off your phone, like use these apps that hide things or whatever. And those are all great tools, but I think like the most sustainable long-term way to not be distracted is to be extremely invested in whatever you're doing and think that it's actually important and sort of worthy of doing without distraction.
I like that. I'll just share one of the ways I've been doing that for a while. I've been working on my own for a couple of years now, and so I set a timer, and it goes along with what you said. So I set a timer for 52 minutes or 25 minutes, and I go, I'm going to give my full attention to this client right now. And I don't want to rip that client off. Like I don't want to spend 10 minutes out of the 25 minutes that I'm actually working for them actually on Facebook or something else, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's giving them priority, right?
Yeah. And I think that that's actually a really sort of interesting, when you have a client, it's actually easy to do this. But even if you
Mhm.
don't have a client, if you can kind of imagine the person who kind of gets the end result of whatever work you're doing is sort of either there with you or sort of in your mind is there with you, it helps you realize like, oh, like I need to hold myself to a higher standard and not kind of fool around. And I find that really, really helpful. So like when I'm, making a feature in Sunsama or writing code, I might take a moment before I start and be like, I'm doing this for, this user who requested this feature. And that I think helps me feel like what I'm doing has some sort of gravity to it. And I want to do a good job, for
Yeah.
that person. Um,
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. You got me thinking that, sometimes it doesn't happen very often these days. Everything's happening via Zoom and all that sort of stuff. But when I do drive to a client and maybe work in their office or whatever, there is a lot more focus. And when I'm in their office or whatever, or they're sitting at the desk next to me, or we're sitting at the same table or whatever, that's a great idea to imagine them being present. That's cool. Excellent. Anything else come to mind?
let's see. Um, I guess I'll touch on one of my kind of pet peeves about productivity. And I mean, I think a lot of people already kind of realize this, but productivity is sort of this antiquated notion that we get out of the industrial revolution, where it's like, okay, how
Mhm.
can we optimize so that we're like producing more widgets per hour, right? Or
Yeah.
like you're doing more tasks per day. But I think the real question is, can you sort of produce the things that you deem to be worthy of producing? And if you ask someone who's feeling like, oh, I'm not being very productive, it's unlikely that they're going to tell you that I'm like, you know, I'm getting 10% less done than I really want to each day. It's more likely that they'll say, I'm just not getting the things done that I think are important.
Right.
And I think rather than focusing on kind of optimizing, it's like, to be productive, you really want to kind of answer the question of like, what do I need to do to sort of make or produce the things that I think are really valuable. And I think that comes from being really intentional about what you think those things are, rather
Hmm.
than, you know, picking up new tools or kind of, new strategies like waking up at 5 a.m. and drinking coffee with butter in it. Like those kind of things are like optimizations that you can make. But
Yeah.
like you really have to start with the more fundamental question, which is like, am I actually working on the things that I think matter? Um,
Yes. Yeah, good stuff. And I'll just add again from my own self is starting my day earlier and then using Sunsama. My first thing I do is I open up Sunsama and I plan out my day. And often by 8 or 9 o'clock, I've done a couple of really important projects already, and that feels really good. Whereas before, I wasn't starting my day until 9 o'clock, and then I wasn't really. Then I would take time to plan, and so it was like by 10, I was only just beginning, but now by 9, maybe I've done 2, 3 important things already. So the combination of changing my schedule and using your program is is great. It's working well.
Good. That's what we like to hear. That's why we're hard at work making it. So
So what's been the feedback? Actually, I want to ask you a question too,
sure.
because um, in my opinion, it feels like you're very conservatively rolling this out. So are you sort of taking a crawl, walk, run approach, or what's your approach to rolling this out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, we certainly are kind of moving, I would say, deliberately, more so
Mhm.
than slowly, or maybe that's what I like to tell myself. But um, we're sort of like working our way through making sure like, okay, like when somebody new shows up to Sunsama, do they feel like, within the first 14 days of using it, like consistently that they're like, yes, this is valuable and it's so valuable that I'm willing to sort of pay to use this going forward. And then sort of the next question, and that's one we feel like we've just sort of finished answering in the past kind of 6 months. And the next question is like, okay, once people are doing that, do they stick around and continue to use it for 9 months and a year? So we're yes, we're moving slowly, but we're trying to make sure that like the product that we're building is kind of a not a leaky bucket. It doesn't make sense for us to spend a lot of kind of time, energy, and money on marketing something if we feel like people show up and then they never use it again, which is sort of a well-known problem with productivity products where people will show up once, say like, oh, this is cool or this is great, and never use it. And obviously the proof is in the pudding, and in this case the pudding is revenue. So if we can't prove that out, there's really no point in kind of rolling it out aggressively. um, and one of the other things we're doing is we're kind of trying to keep our team as small and lean as possible so that we can kind of quickly iterate on user feedback without too much kind of process and hierarchy. And if tomorrow we had 100,000 people sign up for the product, we would sort of be inundated with like more to do than we could actually act on. So that's kind of the process that we use to move forward.
Cool. You probably won't be able to do this all the time, but I was having difficulty with something and I got an email back from you right away. And I think Travis emailed me too. So
Yeah,
incredible personalized customer service right from the top of right from the
yeah,
co-founders of the company. So that was kind of neat.
yeah. At this point, we only have a few thousand sort of paying customers, so it's
Yeah,
still feasible. But
sure.
we also look forward to the day where answering support tickets is not the best use of Travis and
Yeah,
my time.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. I was reluctant to even mention it, but
No, it's all
and
good.
people don't remember this, and you're probably too young to even remember this too. But when Gmail came out, it was difficult to get a Gmail account. Like they did something similar to what you were doing. They rolled it out slowly, and I think it was so that they could. It was quality over quantity, and now there's probably a billion people have a Gmail address. I don't know,
For
but
sure.
yeah, yeah, they took their time to make sure they got it right before they sent it out. Yeah. Right on. Well, good stuff. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And what's the best way for people to find out more about Sunsama?
The easiest thing they can do is just go to sunsama.com. That's SUN, like sun in the sky, and then Sama, SAMA, sunsama.com.
Neat. And where does the name come from?
The name is it's actually kind of a made up name that we chose, but it comes from the word sun, obviously, which is sort of the primordial timekeeper or bringer of the day
Right, right.
for humankind. And then Sama is a Japanese honorific for respected one. So kind of put together, it translates to respected sun, which we thought would be a good name for a daily planner.
Neat. That's great. So yeah, it's sunsama.com and I can't say enough about how much I like it, so I hope people will check it out. Thanks
Cool.
again.
Yeah. Thanks for the time.